these were like a light switch. They made those industries grow overnight. And we're seeing a lot of variation in weather patterns, creating challenges for communities and businesses across the country, driving more scarcity. Members of Congress say, I don't want more data centers in my district. We don't want more growth. Step you go to try to augment supply of water because it costs less on average than desalination. I was a lawyer. I never thought about the water industry. I didn't know anything about it.
I guess somehow you have to jump in, and now you're in the water business.
Water is a unifying issue, an investment tax credit for industrial water reuse. Industries grow overnight. You basically sustainably increase the supply of water forever.
Welcome to this episode of the Salty Water Podcast. Today we have the opportunity to look at water policy issues at the global and U.S. national level. Our guest today is Jon Freedman, perhaps the one person who, based on his experience and current positions, is best situated to inform us on these issues. Jon has his BA from the University of Virginia, a law degree from William and Mary, and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Jon's career includes DC-based government affairs positions at the largest water companies, specifically General Electric and Suez, and he's currently global head of policy and stakeholder engagement at Veralto. Jon has literally taught the course at the University of Pennsylvania on the future of water. Importantly for our discussion today, Jon is a board member and the president of the International Desalination and Reuse Association, and he's a Water Reuse Association board member and vice president. These organizations are two of the major umbrella trade advocacy groups for the water industry. From this vantage point, Jon regularly meets and interacts with global and U.S. national government and business leaders in the water industry, and he's uniquely positioned to give us an insider's view on the new developments on legislative and regulatory policies, as well as corporate strategies to advance resilience and meet the challenges of climate change to the water industry. Welcome, Jon, to the Salty Water Podcast, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric, and thanks for that very kind introduction.
So first off, on a personal note, you've spent your career in the water industry and the water sector. Early on in your career, was there a person, a mentor, or an experience that had an impact on you professionally that led you to this career in the water industry?
Yeah, I mean, there for sure was, but the first thing, Eric, is I think you were an engineer by training, right? And so I think you knew kind of where you were heading is my guess, but I was a lawyer. He was doing kind of just corporate law and litigation. Then I went to business school and had a degree in finance with a concentration in real estate. I never thought about the water industry. I didn't know anything about it.
Right.
But when I graduated from Wharton and went to work in the real estate industry, I ended up working for a company that was wholly owned by a New York Stock Exchange listed water utility called United Water. And United Water was at that time 30% owned by Suez. You mentioned Suez, and Suez is headquartered in Paris and was the world's largest water company at the time. And so I went to work for a real estate developer, not knowing anything about water. And then after a couple of years, was selected for a senior leadership program. And in the senior leadership program, they gave me the opportunity to learn the core business, which was water. So that was kind of my path in. And I would say that Don Carella, you may know him, but he was the CEO of United Water. He was a mentor, not just for me, but for all the
Many people.
team there. And a guy named Mike Fallon, who led the real estate business, who was a great leader and mentor.
Well, I guess somehow you have to jump in, and now you're in the water business.
Yeah. I was more of a bank shot. Right.
Yes, a bank shot. So jumping to the current situation, in DC, there's a lot of change in water policy and regulatory policies at the current time. From your vantage point, working with governments and industry, what specific policy changes in the U.S. do you believe are most urgent to accelerate investment in a resilient water infrastructure and reuse over the next decade?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So let's start with what's going on in DC. So we have a year into the second Trump administration. Both parts of Congress, the House and the Senate, are held by Republican majorities. I think in general, Eric, water tends to be a nonpartisan issue here in the U.S., or say bipartisan issue, and everybody supports adequate clean water. And that's true of the current administration. It's true of the Biden administration. And in my entire career, it's been true. So water is kind of a unifying issue. I would say that in general, right now, there's a, say a kind of non-regulatory bent. Like let's kind of tone down regulations federally, but that means that states are kind of filling the breach, especially blue states. That's kind of one thing. Second thing is the administration is asking to kind of cut funding for a lot of federal programs, just including some water programs. So that's kind of a headwind that's out there for a lot of utilities across the country. What I tend to focus on is water scarcity right now, Eric, and ties into
Okay.
resilience and how can we get communities and businesses across the country to reuse more water. And that's kind of why I'm so tied into the Water Reuse Association in the US. And you mentioned the International Desalination and Reuse Association, or IDRA, kind of outside the US.
When you look at the U.S. policy landscape and the things going on here, and you compare it to places like the Middle East or Singapore, that in some ways could be argued are perhaps further ahead or have developed technologies, do you see anything in the international experience that would help or could be positive if it was brought back to the U.S. and adopted here?
I think so. I mean, for one thing, just starting with the US, I think the US does a pretty good job. So our EPA is a model for regulatory agencies around the world. Our Safe
Right.
Drinking Water Act, our Clean Water Act, these are models for countries globally. I think one thing, Eric, that US water policy at the federal level tends to be a bit fragmented. And there's been some testimony in Congress that there are 25, I don't know the exact number, but it's been testified that there are 25 different agencies and sub-agencies at the federal level that touch on things like water quality and water research. And so that's a lot. And I think there's an effort to try to coordinate a bit better. There's a water sub cabinet nowadays that tries to meet periodically. But some countries, I think, are much more centralized and coordinated on their water policy. Singapore is an example. You mentioned
Yeah.
that. Israel is an example. And I think we can learn something from that. We also have a system where we have 50 states, and each state can set its water policy to some extent too. So you're only going to get so far doing that. But the other thing is incentives. So I think Singapore and Israel have done a very good job of incentivizing the behavior they want, and we could probably do more on that front.
On things like conservation and reuse. That's
Yeah,
what you're.
I think
That's,
about
yeah.
mainly from the standpoint of reuse, because if you think about building resilience, to me, water scarcity is one of the biggest threats we're facing. I mean, you read the newspaper almost every day. There's something about the Colorado River Basin, and all these states are counting on that water, but the flows tend to be lower than projected, and so states are worried about how they're going to have enough water in the West and Southwest here in the U.S. So I think to build resilience, Eric, if we could just recycle, reuse more of our wastewater, we would be at a much more sustainable path going forward. And the other thing is I would tighten the focus and say there's been some federal incentives, not a lot, but some federal incentives for municipal water reuse.
Right.
But here in the US, industry uses almost 4 times as much water as cities do. But there are no incentives that I'm aware of, federal incentives for industrial water reuse. So I think if we could come up with something like an investment tax credit for industrial water reuse,
Mhm.
that would be a huge step forward. And you think about it, look at some other industries like wind, like solar, where the economics didn't necessarily work, but there was a public policy reason to want to have more solar, to want to have more wind, sustainable sources of energy. So these tax credits were like a light switch. They made those industries grow overnight. And I think you could do the same thing with to get industry to reuse more water.
You think a tax incentive would be better than a mandate for zero liquid discharge, let's say, be more of a easy to adopt and more financially incentivize the industries to move in that direction.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of mandates. I mean, if there's an absolute urgent emergency, I can see how you might want to use a mandate. But in general, I believe in giving people options. And the thing about an investment tax credit is people would use it where it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you have a ton of water and you don't need to worry about recycling it, fine. But in areas where water is scarce, and you want to think about, gee, should we be recycling water in this refinery, in this power plant, in this data center? This is kind of a boost to help make the economics work.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned water scarcity and resilience. And we see, certainly here in North America, as a result of climate change, presumably droughts and floods and these sort of massive events, challenging concepts like the 100-year storm and the 50-year storm. And obviously, that requires a lot of nimbleness and adjustment, especially at the state and local level. What do you see as the challenges there? Are there policies or financing or technologies that would help these state and local folks get ahead of this? And how do you see that evolving at the cutting edge where it counts?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, we're seeing a lot of variation in weather patterns that is creating challenges for communities and businesses across the country. I think in general, the consensus view is that climate change is making a lot of places hotter and drier. So that's something that, that's driving more scarcity. We're seeing growth in a lot of places. I know I've spoken to people, certain members of Congress who said, I don't want more data centers. I don't want to pick on data centers. I think data
Right.
centers are super important to our country. And I think a lot of them use water very sustainably. Well, I've heard it. Members of Congress say, I don't want more data centers in my district. It's, we don't want more growth, right? But I think you can build that resiliency through, again, I focus on water recycling. If you take this wastewater and strip out the H2O molecules so that you can reuse them for anything, that's the answer, because then you basically sustainably increase the supply of water forever.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, at least being here in Florida, that, we're the leading state in the 50 for water reuse by a large measure, even compared to Texas and California. We're also moving along. Yet in the United States, we're very sparse on seawater desalination. We do a lot of brackish water desalination. Then you go, to the Gulf countries, and they're very high on seawater desalination as a matter of necessity. And I guess some reuse, but again, there's sort of the psychological and somewhat religious barriers in the Gulf countries. But that comparison is always interesting to me that they're so far ahead on seawater desalination, and we're so far ahead in reuse. I wonder if you have any thoughts, just a function of culture and history?
Well, I think you already nailed it. Like a lot of it's culture,
Yeah.
or religion and culture. But also, I had a Secretary of Interior here in the U.S. once say to me, I'm not a fan of desalination. I think it's
Mhm.
bad for the environment. And I remember saying, I just said, well, we this was back when I was a GE, Eric. And I
Yeah.
remember saying, I don't think we've ever sold a desalination plant anywhere in the world where there was another viable option. And if you think about it, it tends to be more expensive than conventional water, or just pumping more water from a river, from the ground. So you don't do it unless you need it. But
Mhm.
if you need it, it's a great option to have.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think in some regions where reuse here in the US tends to be the first step you go to try to augment supply of water, because it costs less on average than
Right.
desalination. In some regions of the world, maybe they go to desalination first because of the cultural issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Kind of gets me to the next question I wanted to ask you about, which is um, the rate of innovation and how do you see things evolving? And again, in a highly regulated environment, especially with state regulators, my experience is, they're kind of slow to adopt and incorporate, sort of newer methods or newer approaches to things because everything that's working now is based upon strong science and strong lab results and test results, and they can be sure of everything. Yet in the other parts of the world, perhaps the regulatory environment's not so well advanced and they're more open to innovation. But what do you see as the barriers from your position, again, with one foot in the US and one foot in the international side? How would you think about that topic?
It's a really good question, because I hear this all the time. And you coming, I think, from the engineering world, Eric, you've a lot of your clients have probably been municipal governments and also large industries. So you have a sense of what their appetite for trying new things is. Even with that kind of barrier to innovation, like nervousness to try new technologies. If you look at the big picture is when at GE, I remember we first started selling desalination solutions. I think it was, and this is kind of in the 2005, 6, 7, 8 range. I think it was about $1 per cubic meter
Right.
of treated desalination water was the cost of these plants we were building. And
Right.
now I look around and I see some plants in the 40 cents, 42, 44 cents, 45 cents per cubic meter. So even with whatever these innovation barriers may be, I mean, the cost has come way down, and I think
Right.
it's still going down.
Correct.
And so, and a lot of that is, making the capital equipment less expensive, configuring things in a much more efficient way, and also bringing down the energy consumption, which in a
Right.
desalination plant, I think typically is 40+% of the operating cost.
Correct.
So a lot of
Correct.
energy recovery devices being used or new innovative things. So in desalination, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's reluctance to try new things, but it seems like the process innovation is still getting implemented.
Yeah. Some people say they see potential for some new technology that jumpstarts seawater reverse osmosis, like Seawater RO did to the thermal technology. So time will tell.
Yeah.
More on the commercial side, again, you've been in the industry. It's been a lot of change and evolution, a lot of corporate consolidations, big changes and uncertainty in the regulatory. Everybody argues about certainty and uncertainty. And there've been a lot of success stories, and there's been some catastrophic failures over the history of our involvement in the industry. Are there any lessons learned or observations that you would share on the commercial side and the corporate side from your experience? Is bigger always better for Waller?
No, not in my opinion. I think there's room for big and for small. And, I look at, you probably know this organization too, but Imagine H2O, which
Mhm.
Scott Bryan runs, which is always kind of incubating a new emerging technologies for water treatment. And I think he's got just a stable of tremendously talented people with great ideas, and so we always need that, and even bigger companies. I work for Veralto now, Eric. I remember you
Yeah,
came into my Washington office in DC, I
yeah,
don't know, it was 20 something years ago. GE was
yeah,
obviously a a behemoth, but Veralto in water is pretty big too. And Veralto, our technologies are used to test and treat water for 3.4 billion people around the world every day. So
yeah.
big global perspective. But even Veralto, and we have our own R&D and innovation efforts internally, we're looking to find those emerging players and invest in them or work with them to bring their solutions to market. So no, there room for big and small players alike.
When you teach a course at Penn on the water industry and the future of it, what do you tell the students, and what do you tell them about? I assume some of them are taking the course because they might see a future themselves in the water industry. What's your sense of where students are?
I taught for 10 years, no, 12 years at Penn, 10 years in the college itself,
Yeah,
the Master's in Environmental Sciences, and 2 years at the Wharton school, business school, and MBA class. And I resigned after my last class this past week. I can't do it anymore, Eric. It's too much work. My co-teacher, Charlie Iceland from World Resource, he was at World Resources Institute at the time. And we had 75 MBA students. And
wow,
I could barely figure out how to even physically get back into Philadelphia in time for a class. I'd be coming back from Europe or whatever. Too much. But in short, the MBA class, that was kind of what my passion was. And there, the message for me was, hey, every business leader, there are things you need to know about water and how to navigate global water challenges and also how to even capitalize on them from a business standpoint. And so that was kind of the overarching objective of the class. And then there were classes on corporate water sustainability. There were classes on M&A opportunities and bringing in experts like Andy Seidel, who was a year
yeah,
ahead of me at Wharton. I didn't know him there, but I've known
yeah.
him since. And people to talk about their experiences in the global water industry.
That's interesting, especially the graduate student level. These folks are moving right into business, and so that's
Yeah,
interesting.
and there was a lot of interest, and you think about it, it was a 75 person maximum attendance class, and we had 75 students enrolled.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of coming toward the end of our time. It's gone quickly. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up? Any perspective or words of wisdom that you can point to from your great experience?
I would just say I never had any idea of entering the water industry. Functionally, I did some things in it, like mergers and acquisitions and corporate development and business development and government affairs. But I never thought about going into the industry, Eric. But I've found, and I'm sure this is true for any industry, when you get to learn a domain and build your
Yep.
network, it can be very fulfilling, and there's a lot of psychic income in addition to whatever other living you're able to earn. So
Right.
for me, it's been kind of a wonderful experience, and just getting to know people like you through the years. A lot of great people in the industry.
Yeah, I would echo that and second that motion. So thank you again, John, for your time.